So if you haven't been here for the last 2 days, my name is Shuka Rastegarpour. I'm an environmental scientist at the State Water Resources Control Board. I've been there for about 7 years, but I have moved around quite a bit. So I wanted to kind of give a perspective of just civil service, working for the government as an early career scientist. And I'm just going to lay out just in terms of my presentation. So I'm just going to go through each position / projects there are that I've worked on. I'm not going to go into too much detail just because there's just always a whole lot of context, but I wanted to outline the main skills that kind of popped up in my head that were really helpful or essential for me to either have or to develop in order to perform the best that I could in order to complete said project. And so I'm going to go through each position or project it is that I've worked on and then highlight the main skills that I felt was really helpful and hopefully will provide you some guidance and some helpful opinions on how you can use them as well. So this is just kind of a very brief, this obviously is not the complete list of skills that you need, but it's just very general. It's the first 4 things that came up to my mind. So there's project management skills, being able to develop a schedule, outline your milestones, know what your resources are, who are the people that you're going to be collaborating with, who your stakeholders are. In order to meet your project needs and to complete your project. And for my instance, completing a project means, adopting a policy or adopting a permit at the water board. The second is communication. Your written and oral skills obviously have to be raised quite a bit because there's a lot of writing in policy work and permitting writing, and there's a lot of oral work as well, where you're going to be talking to different levels of stakeholders, where it's going to be the public or it's going to be your board members. So you have to learn how to you're going to use your communication skills and be able to interchange how you communicate depending on who you're going to be talking to. Interpersonal skills is also very helpful to know who the people are that you're interacting with and know how to socialize with them and to be very mindful about the types of people that you're going to be working with. And of course, collaboration and negotiation. A lot of these obviously overlap, but collaboration and negotiation is also very important in order to move forward and being able to effectively work with your stakeholders in order to get said project done. So my background, I graduated from Sacramento State University in environmental studies, so it's a very interdisciplinary type of field where my understanding of environmental issues was either in the scientific, political, ethical, or social context. So it's very, very broad. But I use this sort of background in the time when I graduated. I was a student assistant for the Air Board at the time. So our requirements for graduation was to do an internship. And so when I was in school, they gave us a lot of resources in order to know how you can go apply. And they gave us all those resources and tools so that we knew where we would go online to apply and all that stuff. So I was a student aide for the Air Board. I worked in the Ombudsman's office, aka the Public Affairs Office. So I interacted with a lot of members of the public. It could be the permittees. So for the Air Board, we had received a lot of calls from, say, truck drivers who had to upgrade their PM filters to meet air quality standards. And the skills highlighted that I feel like I developed during the time when I was working for the Air Board is my communication and interpersonal skills. A lot of the people who would call were very, very angry or upset because those filters are really, really expensive. And so they would call and they feel like they need to take it out on somebody, and that happened to be me. So I have like plenty of stories. There's one where like I had a 45-minute conversation with a guy who told me he was going to put me and Mary Nichols to jail. She's the chairwoman for the Air Board. And so you have to just sit there and you have to listen. Like you learn when you're interacting with those kinds of people that they just want to vent. And so you sit there, you agree with them, you let them talk it out. You're not there to come into any form of agreement. You're just there to listen to them. And so I remember that conversation ended up talking about his music and piano and stuff. It was really funny. So that was something that I had to work on. But so I graduated in 2011, where the state was not hiring. So when I graduated, I applied to, of course, like many consulting firms or wherever it was that was available. But when when I finished school, when you're working for the state of California, the contract agreement was you have to be considered a student, meaning that you need to have enrolled in 6 units. And so I couldn't work in my position anymore. And I asked my supervisors, hey, can I still stay here and be like in this environment and at least like volunteer for you? And they said, sure. So I obviously, volunteer work isn't for everyone. It really depends on your situation. But if you do have an opportunity, if you have the time, even if it's like a couple hours out of your week and you really are interested in an organization, just reach out to them and say, you know, I have these other commitments, but I would like to know more about your organization. And a lot of times they will let you come in and be able to explore what it is that they do. And so I find it very funny that in my volunteer work at the Air Board for that 1 month that I was there, or for the 1 month duration of the volunteer work, I met a lot of different kinds of people. I was able to go around and explore the different programs. I wasn't restricted to the public customer service call center anymore. I was able to build a lot of really good relationships and be able to meet people from different agencies. And that's when I was introduced to a lot of people at the Water Board, which is where I ended up transferring over. So I was employed, well, the hiring freeze was lifted, so they were allowed to hire me. So during that duration, I worked for the Ocean Standards Unit in the Division of Water Quality at the State Water Board. And this is where we have an California Ocean Plan, and we set ocean water quality standards. And so the 3 main projects that I worked on was the ones through cooling policy, the desalination policy, and the US EPA vessel general permit. So I'm going to go through all 3 of them real quick. So the ones through cooling policy was a policy that regulated power plants that use ocean or estuarine waters to cool their facilities. And so this policy essentially was eliminating those power plants, and were forcing them to either decommission or to use an alternative means of cooling their facilities. So I always joke and say, you know, they eliminated the water issue and they made it into an air issue, because a lot of them started using cooling air towers to cool their facilities instead. But I would say there was about 12 or 13 coal power plants that used once through cooling, and 2 nuclear power plants, San Onofre and I forgot the other one. But anyhow, so there were 2 nuclear power plants that were also using a lot of ocean water to cool their facilities. So this policy essentially was eliminating the use of taking in water to cool and then discharging hot, warm fish soup back into the ocean. I'm sorry, I was supposed to highlight my skills. So, so the skills implementing this policy was just mainly project management. So this policy was already in place. I amended it once, but it was just to change a date. It wasn't a big deal, but so it was just mainly implementing this policy and doing a lot of interagency collaboration, because these power plants were regulated not just by us, but also the Air Board, the California Energy Commission, and the Public Utilities Commission. And so as we were phasing out these power plants, if they were choosing to decommission, we had to make sure that we also had grid reliability and make sure there weren't power outages everywhere. So there was a lot of interagency collaboration due to this policy, and so you had to work with many agencies in order to ensure that everyone's part was in place and everyone was working together in order to make sure that there are no power outages. So the second policy that I worked on was the desalination policy. So this was about 4 years ago, where we had the water shortage in California, and there was a lot of proposal for desalination facilities to be built on beaches to take in seawater and to desalt the water and bring out fresh drinking water. And these facilities were not regulated in the form of policy. There was no regulation out there that was already in place for these types of facilities. And so we had to work on this policy to not allow desalination facilities to be built where they would kind of do the same activities as the ones through cooling power plants, where they would take in ocean water just in a full open intake pipe, desalt, eliminate the dead fish, everything else that they take in, and then discharge the brine without thinking about the high saline situations of the ocean water that they would leave behind. So I worked on this with a really amazing team I call it the race to adopt the regulation, because there was a lot of pressure from management in order to adopt the regulation before one of the main facilities was built and operations would commence, because they would be operating without regulation, and that's not something that we wanted to be happening in California. So there was a lot of pressure associated with working in with this policy. And so there were many skills that I would say I built for the most part. Project management, this was just really starting from scratch, where we had to look into a lot of research, looking at taking in from subsurface type intakes instead of an open ocean intake, or looking at screens to be able to prevent like intake of fish. So there was a lot of research that we had to do, but project management was really just outlining when our goal deadline for adopting the policy was, and how we were going to get there, who our stakeholders were, who do we need to interact with, how much public participation do we need to do, outlining all of those things, and being able to make sure that we really do our outreach to the fullest that we could, so that once we go up for adoption, we have happy parties all around. So that also includes the collaboration and negotiation skills as well, working with NGOs, making sure that they're happy that the requirements that we're setting are going to be protective under the Clean Water Act and Port of Cologne, working with future permittees so that we're not restraining them from being able to still build their facilities, because the governor was making sure that we're not going to be preventing desalination facilities, but to allow them to be built, but to be operated in an environmentally friendly manner. Interpersonal skills, we had to develop really good relationships with the people that we were working with, because it can become very political really quickly, and so those were kind of like on skills that you kind of had to make at that point in time, whatever the situation was. And I won't go into great detail, but very contentious. It all really depends on your personality and just skill building, and obviously a lot of teamwork. And really quickly, I also worked on the US EPA Vessel General Permit, which is an NPDES permit that regulated the discharge of commercial vessels. So I worked with, again, a lot of collaboration, a multi-agency facilitated thing, where we had to make sure that all the agencies that regulated commercial vessels coming in and out of the ports of LA Long Beach, which you can see here, and the Port of Oakland, were following the requirements of the permit, which was a US EPA, it was a federal permit that we were basically regulating. And so that, again, was mainly a multi-agency effort. After I worked in the Ocean Standards Unit for about 3 years, and then I worked in Industrial General Stormwater Permitting for about 4 years, where we have an industrial stormwater permit, where basically any time it rains on a facility that is defined as an industrial facility, and the runoff from that facility is considered a discharge. So we regulate that and we permit that. The permit was already in place, and my responsibility during that time when I was in the program was to amend the permit to adopt about 36 TMDLs into the permit. And a TMDL is a plan that addresses a water body impairment. And so we had to ensure that those plans were incorporated into this permit because plans and policies don't move forward without a driver. So our driver in this instance was this permit. And so there's certain aspects of the plans of the TMDLs that were responsible to be implemented by the industrial general permit. So we had to incorporate those requirements so that we were being additionally more protective of those water bodies that were defined as impaired. So the contentious item regarding this permit was that we were proposing and adopted effluent limitations, which I will explain later, which is why it was contentious, but this permit only had benchmarks. So there were certain chemical benchmarks that our dischargers had to sample for every time it rained and the water flowed out of their facility, and they would have to sample, and they would have to compare those chemical constituents to the benchmark. And so we were proposing effluent limitations, and if they were exceeded, they would be subject to mandatory minimum penalties and would therefore be fined. And that's contentious because the types of facilities that we regulate under that permit is from facilities like PG&E, who have the money to go out and sample and be able to do all the things that they can do to prevent water quality impairment from their discharges. But then we were also regulating the mom and pop shops that are dismantling cars and doing their business and making money. So that was the main skill that we had to work with, was working with the permitted facilities of all ranges, working with the NGOs, the consultants. Again, project management was a huge factor to outline, how we were going to get to the end of adopting the permit and incorporating the TMDL requirements. Interpersonal skills, again, it's mindfulness of the regulatory impact. So just being very mindful of who it is that you're going to be regulating and how it's going to affect the community. And then now I've only been in the bioassessment program for the past 4 or 5 months now. And of course, our purpose is we collect and we manage bioassessment data to measure ecological health of our waters, and per our regulatory or statutory authority, and the responsibility of the water boards is to protect, enhance, and restore the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of our water bodies. And so my role coming into this program with a policy and a permitting background is to see how we can communicate bioassessment data to establish and adopt ecological standards into our permits and our policies. So again, this is not like the full list, but again, qualities for success. It's really important to have passion for what you do. It's really, really important to enjoy and love what it is, what you do, because that is kind of your driver for going into work every day and being able to adapt and be resilient to management needs and responsibilities. I highly would recommend people to just throw your ego out the door, be open to be vulnerable, be exposed to learn everything that there is to know when you're coming into a new position or to a new role, just because it's better to just be very open about that than to just pretend that you know everything, because it's not going to really lead you anywhere. So these are just certain qualities that is good to have. If you don't have it, that's okay. You can still hopefully do your job. But these were things that were really helpful for me. And mindfulness is also really important. It's good to have mental health going into your role, and you're going to have to know that when you're going into working for the government and working in this type of role, is that coming from a science background, when you look at the science, it has to be a certain way based on the research, but being in this type of system, that it's not always going to go your way. There's a lot of influence from management, or a lot of influence from our board members, or even a lot of influence from the governor. And so you're going to have to be adaptable to the fact that, there's a lot of politics when it comes to policy and permit building. And just tying this all together, the skill toolkit that I kind of proposed at the very beginning is obviously applicable in any profession. I didn't want to identify myself as a freshwater scientist because that would be a lie, but it's kind of, it's really applicable to any profession. You could be in freshwater science, water quality science, you could be doing geology, whatever it is that you're doing. Just make sure that you kind of bring in those skills or seek the skills that you know that you're really good at and highlight that when you come into the workplace or when you're going into your profession. And again, my focus is really watershed protection because it's all connected at the end of the day. I worked in ocean water quality, I worked in freshwater quality and stormwater, and now in bioassessment. And I wanted to hashtag or highlight the hashtag protect what you love, which was a hashtag that one of our first California Sea Grant Fellows made up when she started working for us. So it was really, really awesome. But anyways, just wanted to highlight that, everything that we do, no matter what area of the watershed you are working in, is really, really important. So anyways, that is wrapping up my presentation. That's my information. Thank you.